Chapter 4. When the balloon of the Duke approached the habitation of Sir Ambrose, its occupiers perceived the worthy baronet walking with hasty strides towards the mount of the Telegraph, which commanded an extensive view of the surrounding country, followed by Edric and Dr. Entwerfen, who appeared vainly endeavoring to persuade him to relax a speed so little suited to his advanced years. "Talk not to me of going slowly, when I expect news of my darling Edmund," exclaimed Sir Ambrose, continuing his rapid pace, his heart beating with paternal pride and his countenance beaming with exultation. "I am also anxious to hear of my brother," said Edric, "but after the information we have already received by the telegraphic dispatch, it appears to me that we have little more to learn of importance." "Edric, you are not a father, and you can have no idea of a father's anxiety," replied Sir Ambrose, hurrying on to the mount, as though he hoped the rapidity of his motion would afford some relief to the impatience of his mind. Whilst the party of the Duke, seeing the point to which he was hastening, opened the valves of their balloon and made preparations to descend upon the same spot. The Duke and Sir Ambrose were always glad to meet, but as the present occasion was one of more than ordinary interest, so they now greeted each other with more than ordinary pleasure. The Duke had always been warmly attached to Edmund, and his voice actually trembled with agitation as he exclaimed, "Well, my old friend, you see your brave boy is determined to keep us alive. Still, our blood would stagnate in our veins if he did not give us a fillip now and then to rouse us. But what does the young rogue say of himself? I hope he is not wounded." "He never mentions himself," replied Sir Ambrose, tears glistening in his eyes, as he pressed the hand of his friend warmly in his own. "Edmund loves his country too devotedly to think of either peril or reward in her service." "But he shall have a reward," cried the Duke, laughing, "and a fitting one, too. Elvira, what say you?" Elvira blushed, smiled, and looked down, as young ladies generally do upon such occasion, whilst Sir Ambrose, who had now reached the summit of the mount, was too eagerly looking round in every direction to hear his friends remark. In those days, the ancient method of conveying the post having been found much too slow for so enlightened a people, an ingenious scheme had been devised, by which the letters were put into balls and discharged by steam cannon from place to place, every town and district having a piece of tall, metallic or woven wire suspended in the air, so as to form a kind of net to arrest the progress of the ball, and being provided with a cannon to send it off again, when the letters belonging to that neighborhood should have been extracted, whilst, to prevent accidents, the mail-post letter balls were always preceded by one of a similar description, made of thin wood, with a hole in its side, which, collecting the wind as it passed along, made a kind of whizzing noise, to admonish people to keep out of the way. The mount on which Sir Ambrose now stood commanded an extensive view, and the scene it presented was beautiful in the extreme. On one side, innumerable grass fields, richly wooded, and only divided from each other by invisible iron fences, appeared like one vast park, whilst, on the other, the waving corn, its full heads beginning to darken in the sun, gave a rich, glowing tint to the landscape. But Sir Ambrose thought not of the prospect. He did not even see the murmuring brooks and shady groves, the smiling valles, and swelling hills that constituted its beauty. No, his attention was wholly occupied by a small black spot he had just discovered on the edge of the horizon. In breathless anxiety, his eyes almost starting from their sockets, he bent eagerly forwards, gazing on this small and at first almost imperceptible speck. It gradually grew larger and larger, it rapidly approached. And in a few seconds a slight noise burst through the air as the long-expected balls whisked past him. Sir Ambrose's agitation was excessive. With trembling limbs and livid lips, he hurried to the nearest station, which luckily was close at hand, and round which several of his household were assembled in their impatience to hear the news. Sir Ambrose could not speak, but the person whose province it was to sort the letters guessed his errand, and opening the bag held forth the ardently expected treasure. Gasping for breath, Sir Ambrose eagerly attempted to take it, but his hands were unequal to the task. The violence of his emotion overpowered him, and after a short but fruitless struggle, he fell senseless on the ground. The confusion produced by this unexpected incident was indescribable. The old Duke walked up and down, wringing his hands and exclaiming, "What shall we do? What will become of us?" whilst the rest of the party endeavored to give assistance to Sir Ambrose. "Parental affection," said Davis, who had an unfortunate propensity for making long speeches precisely at the moment when nobody was likely to attend to him. "Parental affection has been universally allowed by all writers, both ancient and modern, to be one of the strongest passions of the soul, and the most exalted instances might be produced of the surprising energy of this universal sentiment." "For heaven's sake help me to raise my father," cried Edric. "Give him air, or he will die." "Patience," continued Davis, "is necessary in all things, and is perhaps one of the most useful and estimable qualities of life. It enables us to bear, without shrinking, the bitterest evils that can assail us. Without patience, philosophy would never have made those wonderful discoveries that subjugate nature to our yoke." "Fetch me some water," exclaimed Edric, "or he will expire before your eyes." "It appears to me," said a laborer, who had been mending a steam digging machine in a neighboring field, and who now stood leaning upon his work and looking on gravely at all that passed, without attempting to offer the least assistance, "it appears to me that it would be highly improper to administer the aqueous fluid in its natural state of frigidity under the existing circumstances. The present suspension of animation under which Sir Ambrose labors is evidently occasioned by want of circulation. Now, as it is the property of hot liquors, rather than cold ones, to supply the stimulant necessary for the reproduction of circulation, I opine that hot water would answer the purpose better than cold." In the meantime, Father Morris had brought some water from a neighboring fountain, and throwing it on the patient's face, Sir Ambrose opened his eyes. For some moments he stared wildly around him, but as soon as he began to recollect what had passed, he implored Father Morris to give him his ardently desired letter. "You are not yet equal to reading it," said Father Morris compassionately. "I fear the exertion will be too much for you." "Oh, give it me! Give it me!" exclaimed the poor old man, "if a spark of mercy remain in your soul, do not keep me in this agony." It was impossible to resist the tone of real anguish that accompanied these words. As Father Morris put the letter into his hands, Sir Ambrose took it eagerly, though he trembled so that he could scarcely break the seal. At last, he tore it open and gazed at its contents, but he could not read a word. He dashed away his tears and rubbed his eyes impatiently. All was in vain. The writing was still illegible. "Read, read," cried he, in a voice trembling with agitation. "For heaven's sake, read. Will no one have pity on me?" Father Morris took the letter and read it aloud, whilst Sir Ambrose sat, his eyes raised to heaven, his hands clasped together, and the tears rolling down his aged cheeks, listening to his words, and drinking in every syllable. After giving a circumstantial account of the battle, and assuring his father that he had not been wounded, Edmund proceeded thus. "The Queen has written me a letter of approbation in her own hand, and has been graciously pleased to signify her intention of honoring me with a triumphal entry into London. She has likewise conferred upon me letters of nobility. The goodness of my sovereign makes a deep impression upon my breast, but for the rest, I assure you that neither the applauses of the multitude, nor the privilege of writing Lord before my name, can afford a moment's satisfaction to a heart that pants only for the pleasure of seeing again those most dear to it, nor shall I enjoy my triumph unless those I love be present to give it zest." "I congratulate you, my dear patron," exclaimed Father Morris, as soon as he had finished. "I congratulate you from my inmost soul." "Go to his triumph," exclaimed the Duke, rubbing his hands in ecstasy. "Yes, yes, that we will, won't we, my old friend? God bless him. I'm glad he is not hurt, though. And so, you see, in spite of all his glory, he can't be happy without us. How prettily he says that not all the approbation of my sovereign, the praises of the people, nor what is it? I don't remember the exact words, but I know the sense was that he couldn't be happy without us, and God bless him. I'm sure I'm as happy as he can be at the thought of seeing him." Sir Ambrose could not reply, but the tears ran down his aged cheeks like rain, as his heart breathed a silent offering of thanksgiving to the Almighty Being, who had thus bestowed victory upon his son, and his lips murmured some inarticulate sounds of transport, whilst Elvira and Rosabella mingled their tears with his, for joy often becomes painful and seeks for a relief like grief. The party now slowly returned to the mansion of Sir Ambrose, so completely occupied in discussing Edmund's letter as to be totally unaware that Edric had not accompanied them, yet such was the case. The youthful philosopher's heart had swelled almost to bursting, as he had listened to the reading of his brother's letter, and he now rushed into a thick wood, shelving down to a romantic stream which formed part of the pleasure grounds of Sir Ambrose. Almost without knowing where he was going, Edric plunged amongst the trees and threw himself upon a grassy bank under their shade, upon the border of the rivulet. The gentle murmuring of the water gave a delightful sense of refreshing coolness, particularly agreeable from the burning heat of the day, and Edric lay, his eyes fixed upon the sparkling waves as they danced in the sunbeams, with both his hands pressed firmly upon his throbbing temples, endeavoring in vain to analyze the new and strange emotions that struggled for mastery in his bosom. By degrees he became more calm and, though his heart still beat with feelings he could not quite explain, he felt soothed by the softly gliding streamlet, and the stormy passions of his breast seemed lulled to tranquility as one hand fell carelessly down by his side and the other merely supported the head it no longer constrained. It was not envy that occasioned Edric's emotions, but shame and indignation burnt in his bosom when he recollected that he was wasting his days in comparative obscurity, whilst his brother, only a few years older than himself, was ennobling the name bequeathed to him by his ancestors. And cannot I also become famous, thought he, his heart swelling with emulation. Though I abhor the profession of a soldier, are not other ways open to me of attaining eminence? Why should I not exert myself? I will remain in indolence no longer. I, too, will prove myself worthy of my forefathers, and show the world that the exalted blood of the Montagus has not degenerated in my veins. His eyes sparkled with the thought, and he half raised himself, as though eager to put it into immediate execution. A moment's reflection, however, restored him to himself, and he could not help smiling at his own folly. And yet I call myself a philosopher, thought he. Alas! Alas! How little do we know ourselves, and after all, the pursuit of knowledge is the only employment worthy of a man of sense, the transitory applause of the multitude, it is beneath him to accept. Nature is the goddess I adore, and if it should be granted to me to explore her secrets, I shall be the happiest of mankind. But why should I pass my life in anxious cravings never destined to be realized? The events of today have only proved yet more clearly the little value my society is of to my father. Were I absent, I should soon be forgotten. Why then should I not travel and satisfy these restless wishes that gnaw at my heart and poison every pleasure? I was not born to rest contented with the dull routine of domestic life, and I detest hypocrisy. I will seek my father, and explaining my real sentiments, break off this hated marriage and set off for Egypt immediately. Satisfied with this resolution, Edric rose and walked hastily towards his father's mansion, with all that inward vigor which the consciousness of having made up one's mind is certain to bestow, and which, perhaps, is one of the most agreeable sensations that can be experienced by the human mind, as that of suspense or indecision is undoubtedly one of the most unpleasant. Edric found his father and the Duke busily engaged in consulting upon their intended journey, which was an event in both their lives, for as, since the universal adoption of balloons, journeys were performed without either trouble or expense, the rich had lost all inducement to undertake them, and it was rare for a man of rank to quit his family mansion unless he had some post at court. I have a palace in London, said the Duke, which I hope you will make your home, though it has been so long unused that I doubt whether it will be fit for your reception. Do not distress yourself about making arrangements for my family, replied Sir Ambrose, for you know I have a brother living in London, and though we have not seen each other for years, I think upon such an occasion as this I ought to forget all animosity and visit him, if he will receive me. True, rejoined the Duke, I never thought of that, but you are quite right. Though he did make a foolish marriage, the ties of blood are too strong to be easily shaken off, and this is an excellent opportunity for a reconciliation. Another thing also weighs with me, continued Sir Ambrose, you know that. Though I was so much hurt at his marriage, I was in some measure the cause of it. You the cause of it, exclaimed the Duke, in excessive surprise. You know, resumed Sir Ambrose, my brother was always a bookworm. And the last time I visited him, I found him so uncomfortable and his domestic affairs so dreadfully neglected that I advised him to get an active, managing woman to act as housekeeper. He did so, and in 12 months made her Mrs. Montagu. I always thought your brother was too learned to know anything useful and too clever to be able to take care of himself, but I own I never suspected him of being such a fool as to marry. Perhaps I was a greater one than himself in resenting his conduct, for I believe they get on very well. Mrs. Montagu does not want sense. I do not doubt her abilities, or that she was extremely well fitted for her original station, but very different qualities are required in the wife of Mr. Montagu from those which were suited to his housekeeper. I know it, and also that there is perhaps nothing more difficult than for a person in her situation to preserve the medium between affection and vulgarity. However, I am told that though Mrs. Montagu cannot quite divest herself of the pedantry she acquired at a charity school in her youth, and though she still talks as learnedly as if she had never ventured beyond the precincts of the kitchen, yet that she makes my brother a good wife, and they say her daughter Clara is a charming girl. I can imagine nothing good springing from such a source. Prejudice. My dear Duke, sheer prejudice. Well, I will say no more about it, for, as you justly say, if Mrs. Montagu makes your brother a good wife, and he is happy with her, I don't see any right anybody else has to trouble himself about the matter, and so, as I don't like quarrels in families, I think you are quite right in wishing to see your brother. However, if they do not make you comfortable, I hope you remember you have another friend, and so we will now wish you good day. Come, girls. And the old Duke trotted off, followed by his fair companions. Edric's heart throbbed violently when he found himself alone with his father. The moment was arrived he had been so ardently wishing for, and yet he was silent. He had scarcely had patience to wait the end of his father's conference with the Duke. And whilst it had lasted, he had been arranging and rearranging 1,000 times in his mind the phrases he meant to make use of, yet now they seemed to have all vanished from his memory, and he stood gazing through the open window, his mind feeling a perfect chaos, and without being able to recollect one single word of what he had determined to say. Sir Ambrose, in the meantime, felt perfectly happy, and in the buoyancy of his spirits tapped his son upon the shoulder. What all a mote! Sir Knight of the woeful countenance, said he, come. Come. I will have no gloomy looks today. But, heyday! What is the matter with you, Edric? You don't smile, are you unhappy? You look as if you had something upon your mind. I have something upon my mind, my dear father, said Edric, solemnly, and something that I wish to communicate to you. He stopped when he had said this, but Sir Ambrose did not reply, and for some minutes neither spoke. At length, Edric broke the pause, which had been one of perfect agony to him. And, speaking very fast, he exclaimed, "Yet I don't know why I should hesitate. It is that I do not love Rosabella, that I never can marry her, that I should be entirely miserable even to think of it, and that this is my fixed and unalterable determination." "Heyday," cried Sir Ambrose, "what is all this? Not marry Rosabella. Never, no tortures should induce me. I am convinced she would make me wretched," continued Edric, hurrying through what he meant to say. "Our tempers don't assimilate. We should both be miserable. I should be very sorry to cause either you or the Duke a moment's uneasiness. Very sorry I would die first. But to marry Rosabella would be worse than dying 1,000 deaths. We should be the most wretched of human beings, and you would be unhappy at seeing me so." "Mercy on me," cried Sir Ambrose, heaving a deep sigh and feeling almost out of breath at the volubility of his son. "I thought you dumb just now, but I see that you can use your tongue fast enough when the subject pleases you. Not marry Rosabella. Is the boy mad? Is she not young, beautiful, and highly accomplished? What would you have, I wonder? You certainly must be out of your senses to refuse such a woman, and one too, so superior to yourself in rank and fortune." "In fortune I allow her to be superior, but I think the mystery attached to the name of her father more than compensates for any difference of rank. Don't talk about what you can't understand. Duke Edgar is dead, and his faults should be buried with him. Besides, it is hard the girl should suffer for the sins of her father." "What were those sins, my dear sir? I have often heard them darkly hinted at as something almost too dreadful to mention, but I never heard the particulars." "Edric," said Sir Ambrose solemnly, "if you have the least regard for my feelings, or entertain any duty for me as a son, never again advert to that subject. Circumstances there are relating to it of a deep, awful, and mysterious nature, with which I am well acquainted, but which I have taken a solemn oath never to reveal. Never speak of them again. The bare remembrance makes me shudder. Oh, would to heaven I could forget them. I am very sorry, sir, that my question was such as to give you pain, but rest assured that my curiosity shall never again annoy you. I am not angry with you, Edric. You could not know the feelings your question would create in my bosom, and it was natural you should wish to know something of the father of your intended wife. However, think no more of him. Consider the present Duke as your future father-in-law, and if possible, forget that such a person as Duke Edgar ever existed." "You forget, sir," said Edric, firmly but respectfully, "that I have before declared my determination never to marry Rosabella." "Nonsense," rejoined his father, "you don't know what you are talking about. The world would call me as mad as yourself if I were to let you act so foolishly. Besides, what would the Duke say? To speak candidly, sir, that is what principally annoys me, for I trust that your good sense and affectionate disposition will soon enable you to see the affair in its proper light. That is to say, you think I am an old fool, and that you can coax me to any thing you please. But you shall find your error. You shall learn I will not be coaxed, I will be obeyed. You shall marry Rosabella, or you shall leave my house. My dear father, said Edric, attempting to take Sir Ambrose's hand. Away, sir, cried his father, shaking him off. Obedience far outweighs words. If I am your dear father, you will act in compliance with my wishes. And if you do not, it is a mockery to call me dear. I cannot marry Rosabella. Was ever such obstinacy, such folly? The world will think you distracted. I care not for the world, cried Edric, impatiently. Youth-like, returned his father. It is very strange no one will be contented to take experience at second hand. They must buy it for themselves, and sometimes pay very dear for it before they profit by its lessons. You talk like a child, Edric. When you get a little older, you will find practice and theory very different things. You say you despise the world, but you are wrong. The world must not be despised, nay more, it ought not to be even slighted. As long as you live in it, you must conform to its opinions. It is ridiculous to think otherwise. I don't like to hear people say they don't care for the world. The world must be cared for, and when people pretend to scorn it, it is generally because they are aware they have done something to make it scorn them. But, my dear father, you would not wish me to sacrifice my conscience to its dictates. And pray, sir, what has your conscience to do with the matter in question? Should I not sacrifice it by marrying a woman I feel I could never love? In my opinion, nothing can be more sacred than the marriage vow, and with what feelings could I enter into this solemn engagement in the presence of Almighty God, calling upon Him to witness it, when I knew my heart was at variance with my words? My soul would recoil with horror at such blasphemy. You talk about your conscience, Edric, but should you not rather say your inclinations? The person of Rosabella does not please your fancy, I suppose. And to gratify a capricious whim, you would destroy the happiness of your father and ruin your own prospects forever. It is not of the person of Rosabella that I complain, my dear father. I allow her to be beautiful as a Venus, and that her talents even exceed her personal charms. But when I see her large black eyes flashing fury, and her rosy lips curved into an expression of indignant scorn, I forget her beauty and think only of the fearful passions of her soul. Your objections are futile, Edric. At any rate, they are of no avail. You must marry her. I am sorry it is against your inclination, but I will not have my authority disputed. Besides, the disappointment to the Duke would be dreadful. It was but this morning that he proposed that as soon as you and Edmund should marry, I should give up my estate to you, and he his to your brother, whilst we two old folks should retire to the cottage on the hill and pass the remainder of our lives in contemplating with rapture the happiness of our children. I own the Duke is so obstinate. So, you have discovered that, have you? Well, you are right there, for when he has taken a fancy into his head, no arguments can turn him from his point. But there is a difference between obstinacy and firmness. Now, though I am not obstinate like the Duke, you shall find I can be firm, Edric. However, as I have always been an indulgent father, I do not wish to decide hastily now, and I give you a week to make up your mind, at the expiration of which time you shall marry Rosabella or quit my house forever. No reply, young man, I will not hear a word. Begone, leave me now, and in a week's time let me know your decision. It was in vain to attempt a reply, and Edric left his father's presence oppressed by that strange, mysterious presentiment of evil, which, like a fearful cloud, dark, gloomy, and impenetrable, sometimes hangs upon our thoughts. Foreboding horrors, though so dimly and indistinctly, that, like all the gigantic phantoms we sometimes fancy through the mist of twilight, their terrors seem increased tenfold by the very uncertainty that half shrouds them from our sight. Mingled with these feelings, however, was one of wild, unearthly joy. Driven from his father's house, he would be free to travel, his doubts might be satisfied, he might, at last, penetrate into the secrets of the grave and partake, without restraint, of the so ardently desired fruit of the tree of knowledge. Nothing would then be hidden from him. Nature would be forced to yield up her treasures to his view, her mysteries would be revealed, and he would become great, omniscient, and godlike. His mind filled with a chaos of thoughts like these, which he strove in vain to arrange, and which seemed to swell his brain almost to bursting, Edric involuntarily strolled again into the wood he had so lately quitted, and again throwing himself upon the banks of the murmuring stream, he was soon lost in a reverie.